Next question. So with your involvement in psychology, obviously you teach a class, you're very involved. What do you think needs a lot of improvement when it comes to research studies?
Oh, when it comes to like research itself?
Yes, like, do you think
Okay.
there is something that needs more improvement and kind of is missing a few things, let's just say?
Okay. So are we talking about like the state of science as a whole, or
The state
uh,
of research in science, let's say.
okay, okay. Ooh, bringing out the big guns
Spice,
already. Wow.
space,
Okay. Okay.
spicy questions.
All right. Yeah. So where are we in science? And if I were the global tyrant of all science, what would I change? Oh, wow. I wasn't prepared for that one. Um, well, so some things that have been discussed in the science community for at least a decade at this point. There definitely needs to be some shift to how publication of research is done. So in our class, we've talked about like the scholarly publication model
Mhm.
and peer
Yeah.
review, but we're kind of hitting a breaking point in a lot of ways in that system. Like we're starting to see in a lot of ways how how fragile some of our systems that rely on things like norms can be. So look at Facebook, look at the presidency. Uh, yeah. So just assuming that, okay, everyone's going to be on their best behavior because you have a reputation to uphold, right? Your
Exactly.
good name is on the line. You would never do something like lie to the American population in a press conference, right? And
Right.
doing it, wow, that you would never get away with that.
No, never.
Yeah. So with the state of scholarly publications right now, I've talked a little bit about the peer review process. This is supposed to give a higher standard to what gets published. Now, if we went back 20 years ago, the number of actual publications, the actual journals that are out there, that was like like an order of 10 less than what it is today. So there's been a huge increase in the number of journals. Now, what's driving this? Well, there are now, about 100 times more scientists today than there were 20 years ago. I mean, especially in more recently developing countries, like you look at China, especially,
Mhm.
the number of universities has just ballooned in the past 2 decades. And to be able to establish yourself, you need to get publications. So you need to do research, you need to get out there. And there's just this massive amount of research that is being done, being published, or at least people are trying to get it published. And this has kind of set up this really weird system of entirely like shadow journals, where they have really no credibility. They will just say like, give me $100 and I'll publish your paper and we'll peer review it. And by peer review, they mean I will give it to a friend of mine, and then I'll give it to my dog, who I will pretend is an editor on this paper. And that is like a legit actual thing that has happened. There was a journal that started up, and a researcher in Australia, just for shits and giggles, tried to see if he could get his dog named as an editor, and was successfully named as an editor. So there are hundreds of these journals out there that are predatory, that are preying on all these desperate scholars trying to
Mhm.
get stuff published. And you do a Google Scholar search, you'll find some of this stuff listed as, oh, it's a scholarly journal, right?
Mhm.
It must be legitimate. It was, how could it get published in this seemingly prestigious journal? Yeah, title like a journal on the genetic basis of behavior in neurology. All right. Ooh, that sounds really impressive, right? It's just some dude, cranking out bullshit out of his basement. So, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, that is definitely a big issue that, as science, we don't. It's a whole cultural issue that we don't really have a way of dealing with. Like, you
Mhm.
can't send out the science police to go, bang on these people's doors and arrest them. That's not a thing. So yeah, being able to weed out what is true, what is false, what is good research that actually went through some coherent vetting process versus what is just complete nonsense that somebody is just cranking out to try to graduate from their program and ended up just being plowed into one of these bogus journals. That's a really big issue that we're still grappling with.
Mhm.
So yeah.
I see. So just a couple of clarifications. So did you
Sure.
say these researchers were conducting shadow researches? Was it
So
called?
I call these kind of like shadow journals. Like
Shadow
if
journals.
you're a legitimate journalist or a legitimate scholar, like you may not be aware that like in some cases the majority of journals in your field are just these complete sham operations.
So
Uh,
wouldn't
Far
they
too many.
be,
Oh yeah.
sorry, wouldn't they be, you said that you can't just arrest these people.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't this be misinformation and in some cases just fraud? Isn't that something that's people go to jail for?
Uh, so it's very unlikely to be prosecuted as fraud. If you are upfront about what you're doing, like you give me $100 and I will review this paper and get it published. They can bury stuff in terms of service and all the agreements and all this stuff that people don't really read. We just assume, oh yeah, of course, this is something that's going to be legitimate.
Mhm.
So is there an actual way of prosecuting in a legal sense this kind of thing? Not really. No, no. It is
Really?
not against the law in most cases to have somebody pay you and you publish an article for them. This is just publication, right? This is just commerce. You give me money, I put your article in print.
That
What could be wrong with that?
And do they say that they either receive or give money for these research? Like, is that do they announce it or
Oh
is it
yeah,
hidden?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Where can someone who's reading these research studies like find out if it's actually a shadow research or not, or a shadow journal?
Yeah, so there are some sources. Again, I didn't come super prepared with a bunch of resources for you to check out, but there is at least there has been until recently a single researcher has compiled a list of shady journals that seems to have gone defunct like 2 years ago, partly because it just kept getting longer and longer and longer, and for a
Mhm.
one-person operation to actually flag all of these is way too much. Um, one good website that does some good work in this area is Retraction Watch.
Retraction
Um,
watch.
they do focus a lot more on more legitimate journals, so they don't deal a whole lot with like just completely fraudulent journals.
Mhm.
But they will definitely address these issues too. So even in like legitimate journals and high status journals that have been around for decades, centuries in some cases, you can get some really surprisingly bad research published every once in a while. Sometimes by accident, like oh we thought we were doing an excellent job as scientists, but we screwed something up. Oh no, don't be mad at us.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is a little bit more intentional, deliberate, like somehow the peer reviewers completely missed it. This person was just pulling stuff out of their ass, and you really should have caught that the first time. So,
But I'm confused on. So fortunately for your class, we had to analyze a bunch of studies that had to do with our proposal.
mm-hmm,
And fortunately, all the researches that I had access to were, I think, from a legitimate source, the SMC library. And what I'm thinking is, do they mention that they're receiving funding in their like description or their um,
you're going to have to look really hard before you find it. So you go to the website of a journal and you look up their submission regulations, and one warning sign is if they want like a really high fee for publishing something, yeah, that might be a shady operation.
What would
There
be
are
a
there are
what would be a
journals
high
who do ask
price?
for a fee for publication, but usually it's a little bit more moderate.
Oh,
But yeah, uh, but yeah. So this is something where even in legitimate databases like Elsevier and their databases that they publish, they'll end up you can end up finding some of these bogus journals that have wormed their way in. They've just kind of stuck around long enough that people start thinking, oh yeah, oh, of course, yeah, other people
mhm.
publish in that,
Yeah,
therefore
makes
it must be
sense.
good, right?